I wasn't supposed to be here. Not really. The locker room smelled faintly of disinfectant and old sweat, but all I could notice was her, the way she moved, confident yet not without a subtle softness, like she belonged everywhere and nowhere at once. She looked up from her clipboard, and for a second, time thinned around us. Her eyes met mine, sharp and knowing, and I felt my chest tighten in a way that made no sense for someone half her age. She smiled, a small, deliberate curve of her lips that didn't quite reach her eyes, and yet it pulled me in. "You're not done with me yet," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper, teasing in the way that made me second-guess if I'd imagined it. I tried to focus on the locker in front of me, fumbling with the zipper, but the sound barely registered. Her presence was too loud, too tangible. She leaned against the metal bench, one hand resting lightly on the edge, fingers brushing the surface as though she weren't even aware of the electricity she carried in her gestures. I noticed the faint scent of her perfume, soft, floral, lingering like a memory I didn't yet have. "You always linger this long?" she asked, tilting her head, letting a lock of hair fall against her cheek. There was a vulnerability there I didn't expect, like she was testing me, seeing if I noticed it. I swallowed, my throat dry. I don't know," I admitted. My hands gripped the straps of my bag a little too tightly. "Guess I do." A small laugh escaped her, warm and surprisingly genuine. It brushed against me, softening the sterile space around us. She stood, moved closer, and for a moment, the air between us was heavy, charged. Her arm nearly brushed mine, just enough to send a shiver up my spine. I wanted to step back, but my body betrayed me, leaning in, drawn toward her warmth like a moth to faint, irresistible light. She didn't speak for a while. Just watched me, eyes tracing my movements, noticing details I hadn't realized she could, the way my fingers flexed, how I kept glancing at her, trying not to. She tilted her head again, studying me with a mix of amusement and something softer, unspoken, that made my pulse jag in ways I couldn't control. "You're staring," she said finally. Not accusatory, more like observation. A test. A tease. I'm trying not to," I muttered, hating how shaky my voice sounded. Her smile softened, and she took a step closer. The space between us was narrow now, filled with quiet breaths and the faint hum of the locker room lights. I could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the curve of her jaw, the subtle grace in the way she shifted her weight. I could almost feel her heartbeat through the distance between us, like some secret rhythm only I was allowed to sense. And then, just as I was about to say something foolish, confess something I didn't fully understand myself, the door at the far end of the room creaked. She froze for the briefest second, her gaze flicking toward the sound. Our moment shattered like glass. I stepped back instinctively, trying to erase the tension with movement, but her eyes lingered on me. She tilted her head, a faint smirk playing on her lips, as if she knew exactly how much I was drawn to her. And just like that, the moment ended, though the electricity remained, humming between us, impossible to ignore. I couldn't stop thinking, and somehow, I knew I wouldn't be done with her either. After that first fleeting moment, I couldn't stop noticing her. Every detail, the faint way her necklace swung when she moved, the subtle scent of her perfume that seemed to cling to the air long after she'd passed, became impossible to ignore. And yet, she was careful, never giving herself fully. I understood that. Experience, I guessed, had made her cautious. I remembered snippets of conversation from earlier encounters. A mention of a marriage that had quietly unraveled, a sigh when speaking about years spent balancing responsibilities that never felt her own. She carried herself like someone who had learned to survive, yet there was a vulnerability tucked beneath her polished exterior. That vulnerability was the thread that drew me closer, even though every logical part of me knew the risks. I, on the other hand, had never had anything remotely like what she had. My life was a series of half-finished attempts, fleeting friendships, and a quiet loneliness that gnawed at me in the small hours. And here she was, confident, intelligent, beautiful, yet still human, still real. It made me ache in ways I hadn't expected. We were alone again in the locker room later that week. She was checking a clipboard, brow furrowed, unaware that I had lingered behind, pretending to tie my shoes. The space was quiet, except for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. My eyes found her, tracing the curve of her neck, the way her hair fell just past her shoulders. She glanced up, and for a moment I caught her breath. "You're here again," she said softly, not a question, not a reprimand, but something in between. A recognition. A testing of boundaries. I guess I like the quiet," I muttered, though the words felt hollow. The truth was, I liked her, the way she moved, the way she seemed unaware of how she made me feel, yet somehow aware of it all at the same time. She smiled faintly, and then leaned a little closer than necessary, just enough that I could feel her warmth, the subtle brush of her arm against mine as she flipped through papers. My hand twitched slightly, almost reaching toward her, and I cursed myself for being so exposed. She noticed. She always noticed. Her eyes lifted to mine for a second too long, and I saw a flicker of something, amusement, concern, desire, I couldn't tell. There was a tension I couldn't escape. Every laugh, every shared glance, every accidental brush of fingers seemed to amplify it. I noticed how she sometimes lingered too close when we talked, the way her breath seemed to warm the air near my ear. And then, just when my heart threatened to betray me completely, she'd step back, straighten her posture, and the spell would break. I understood, in a quiet, aching way, that there were reasons we shouldn't cross certain lines. The age difference, the social whispers if anyone noticed, the careful lines she drew for herself after years of protecting her heart. And yet, her presence made every caution feel inadequate. I caught myself imagining what it would be like if none of those lines existed. If she allowed herself just one small indulgence, if I could be honest about everything I felt. My mind raced, yet my body was tethered by fear, hesitation, and respect. And she seemed to sense that inner battle, letting moments linger just long enough to tempt me, just enough to test me. Then it happened, a moment so small, yet it anchored the tension between us. I reached for a towel she had dropped, and our hands brushed. Not deliberately, not exaggeratedly, just a fleeting contact that felt like electricity. Neither of us pulled away immediately. Her fingers lingered, her eyes met mine, and the silence that followed said more than words could. In that quiet, suspended moment, I felt a bond form, fragile, delicate, yet undeniable. She gave a soft exhale, a tiny smile, and took her hand back, but didn't step away entirely. She let the air between us hum, let it stretch just a second longer before returning to the professional guise we both knew we needed. And I knew, then, as clearly as I had ever known anything, we weren't done with each other. Not by a long shot. The locker room smelled faintly of wet towels and lingering bleach, but all I could notice was her, the way she leaned against the locker door, her hair falling just past her shoulders in soft waves. My chest throbbed like it wanted to escape. "I thought you left already," she murmured, her eyes catching mine, warm but unreadable. She held a towel loosely in her hands, twisting it without really thinking. The subtle sway of her fingers made my pulse spike. I forgot something," I said, though my voice faltered. I wasn't lying, but the truth didn't matter. What mattered was being near her, feeling the faint warmth radiating from her body, imagining what it would be like if the distance vanished. We stood there in a quiet, suspended tension, exchanging small glances and half-smiles, our proximity almost unbearable. My hand brushed hers accidentally, or maybe not accidentally, and the spark that shot up my arm made me clench my fists. She looked down at our hands, then back at me, and for a heartbeat, the world felt suspended, fragile and electric. And then the door creaked. We both froze. A shadow passed, a familiar figure peering around the corner. "Oh, sorry," came a voice. I exhaled silently. She smirked, shaking her head as if chastising me silently for my racing pulse. The interruption was small, mundane even, yet it left a hollow tension lingering between us, the kind that makes you aware of every inch of space, every tiny movement. When the door finally closed, we were left alone again. I could feel her presence pressing against me in the emptiness, as if the world had shrunk to just the two of us. Her eyes held mine longer than necessary, and I caught myself leaning in without realizing it. She tilted her head slightly, a silent invitation. My lips felt dry. I wanted, no, needed, to bridge the gap, but hesitation anchored me in place. I began, voice breaking in the silence. Was thinking. Her lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. About? She prompted, letting the word linger like a feather on the air. Her head tilted imperceptibly closer. My heart slammed against my ribs. About everything, I thought. About her laugh, the way she moved, the way her hand had brushed mine earlier. About the quiet electricity that existed between us even when we pretended it didn't. But I couldn't say it. Not here, not now. Instead, I swallowed and stepped just a fraction closer. She didn't pull away. The air between us thickened, every heartbeat loud, every breath shared. I could feel her warmth brushing against my arm, a teasingly small space of intimacy that made my pulse race. We lingered there, suspended in the near touch, in the unspoken acknowledgement of desire. My fingers itched to reach for her hair, to touch her cheek, to close the sliver of distance between us, yet something unnameable held me back. And her eyes, steady, half smiling, half challenging, told me she was feeling the same pull, the same tension. And then, just when I thought I might collapse into her, the world intruded again, the faint shuffle of someone approaching, the echo of footsteps. She exhaled softly, a tiny shiver running down her spine, and for a second, our foreheads nearly touched. Not yet, I whispered, almost to myself. She tilted her head, brushing her hair back, letting the small space between us hum with what we couldn't yet name. And yet, in that tension, in that near contact, we were closer than ever, hearts racing, breaths mingling, either willing to break the spell completely, both knowing we'd cross the line eventually. I didn't mean to linger so long. But every instinct in me, every pulse, every ache, drew me closer. She was sitting on the bench, clipboard resting on her lap, yet her attention was nowhere near it. Her gaze caught mine, soft, calculating, teasing, and my chest tightened in a way that made thinking impossible. I can't, I started, voice low, raw. I stopped, frustrated at how inadequate the words felt. Every moment with her seemed to make language useless, as if the air itself knew what I wanted to say but couldn't. She tilted her head slightly, as if urging me forward. Can't what? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. The words brushed against me like a feather, yet they hit me harder than a shout. I swallowed. You make everything complicated. It was true, though I couldn't say exactly why. It wasn't just the age gap, or what anyone else would think. It was how she made me feel seen, in a way that terrified me and thrilled me all at once. Her lips curved into that faint, enigmatic smile again. Slowly, she leaned just a little closer. The air between us seemed to thicken, vibrating with unsaid words. My hand twitched involuntarily, and before I could stop myself, I reached toward her hair, brushing a stray strand from her face. Her skin was soft, warmer than I expected. She didn't recoil. Instead, she leaned just slightly into my hand, letting the contact linger. My heart slammed against my ribs. Every nerve in my body screamed to close the distance completely, to taste what I'd imagined so many times. I whispered, voice nearly lost in the quiet hum of the locker room. Don't know if I should be here. Her breath hit my cheek, faint but intoxicating. She didn't move away. Her eyes held mine, steady, vulnerable, and unguarded, and for the first time, I felt the weight of my own hesitation crash into something larger than myself. Desire. Fear. Longing. All tangled into one impossible knot. She leaned a little closer, so close I could feel her pulse against my arm. The clipboard slipped from her lap, clattering softly to the floor. Neither of us moved to pick it up. The sound was irrelevant. Nothing mattered except the charge between us, the near imperceptible quiver in her lips, the way her chest rose and fell with measured, deliberate breaths. I shouldn't, she began, then stopped, as if realizing the futility of restraint. Her hand hovered near mine, almost touching. My fingers itched to reach out, to close that infinitesimal gap. My chest tightened, and I caught myself leaning in. Her eyelashes brushed her cheeks, and I imagined what it would feel like to lower my head just slightly, to close the distance we'd maintained for weeks, to let all the tension and longing explode into something real. And then, just as my lips hovered dangerously close to hers, a sudden noise, a locker door banging in the distance, made both of us freeze. She stepped back, heart still racing, eyes locking on mine with an intensity one couldn't name. "Maybe we're not done yet," she murmured, voice low, teasing, almost daring. Her words hung in the air, heavy with promise. I wanted to argue, to confess everything in that instant, but all I could do was nod, my hands still trembling, my body still leaning forward even as she stepped back. For a moment, the world held its breath with us, suspended on the edge of something irreversible. And I knew, we had crossed a line in our hearts, if not yet in our lips. The locker room was quieter than usual that afternoon. A faint hum of fluorescent lights above did little to fill the emptiness between us. I had been replaying the moment from yesterday over and over, the near kiss, the brush of her hair against my fingers, her pulse against my arm, when she finally spoke, low and deliberate. "I need to tell you something," she said, voice careful but carrying weight. Her eyes avoided mine at first, scanning the room as if it could offer an escape. But they always found me eventually, and when they did, I felt a jolt I couldn't explain. "What is it?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my hands were already trembling slightly. She hesitated, exhaling softly. "Someone heard us yesterday." I froze, my chest tightening. My mind flashed to imagined scenarios: a colleague, a friend, someone gossiping. My stomach turned, a mix of panic and something else I wasn't ready to name. She shifted closer, almost brushing my shoulder, and I noticed the tension in her posture. Her hand twitched near the edge of the bench, and for a moment, it hovered as if wanting to reach for mine but retreating at the last second. The air between us thickened, heavy with unspoken words, with fear and desire tangled together in impossible knots. They think I'm involved with someone else," she admitted, voice breaking slightly, and I realized it wasn't a lie. The way she leaned back, jaw tight, fingers gripping the bench, betrayed how vulnerable she felt. My stomach churned, not from jealousy exactly, but from the sudden awareness of how much I cared, how much I could lose. I took a careful step closer, letting my hand brush hers accidentally, or maybe not accidentally. Her breath caught, faint but sharp. She looked at me, and in that glance, I could see the entire storm: fear, desire, guilt, and longing, all coiled together. I don't care what anyone else thinks," I said, voice low, steadying myself even as my pulse raced. "Not about me, not about us. I only care about this, you." Her eyes widened slightly, and she trembled just enough for me to notice, hand brushing against the side of her thigh as she shifted closer. The tension was unbearable, but it also drew us nearer, like magnets. Our bodies weren't touching fully yet, but the heat between us was palpable. "I shouldn't," she started and then stopped. Her words dissolved in the space between us. I watched her throat move as she swallowed, saw the way her fingers twitched toward mine, stopped, then hovered again. Desire and fear warred in her, and I wanted to erase the hesitation entirely, to pull her close and let the world outside cease to exist. Instead, I settled for something smaller, deliberate, a step closer, enough that her shoulder brushed mine. She inhaled sharply, gaze dropping to our touching arms, then lifting quickly to meet mine again. There was something intimate in that silent acknowledgement, something hotter than anything we had said aloud. "I've wanted this," I whispered, letting the words hang between us, heavy and soft all at once. "I've wanted you since, a long time ago. But I couldn't, and you can't, know that yet." Her lips parted slightly, and I caught the faintest intake of breath. Her hand brushed my wrist, a hesitant, searching touch that made my chest ache. She stepped back a little, trembling, as if the tiniest distance could save her from herself. And yet the heat between us didn't fade, it pulled us together like gravity, relentless and undeniable. "I don't know what we're doing," she admitted finally, voice low, barely audible. "But I do know I can't stay away." The words hit me like a spark in dry grass. Everything changed in that moment. The rules we thought existed, the careful lines we'd drawn, the distance we'd maintained. There was no undoing what had just been revealed, no retreat. And yet the danger, the risk, made the pull between us even stronger. I stepped closer, closer than ever, until the space between us was charged and electric. The world outside could wait. All that mattered was her, and the impossible tension that held us suspended, trembling on the edge of something inevitable. The locker room was quiet, but the silence felt alive, vibrating with everything we hadn't said, everything we'd been holding back. I could feel her presence like heat pressing against me, every small movement magnified. She leaned slightly forward, her hand brushing against the bench, and my pulse spiked. "I don't know if this is right," she whispered, voice low, trembling almost imperceptibly. I shouldn't." Her words were half warning, half temptation. My chest tightened, and I realized I didn't care about right or wrong anymore. I only cared about her, about this, about the precarious, impossible thing that existed between us. I stepped closer, careful, deliberate. Our arms brushed, then shoulders, then just a hair's breadth of space. Her breath hit my cheek, faint and intoxicating, and I wanted to close the distance completely. She shivered slightly, and I swore I could feel it along my own skin. "Then don't think," I whispered, letting the words brush against her ear. My lips were almost brushing her hair, and I could feel her inhale sharply. "Just feel." Her fingers twitched toward mine, hesitant, searching. I took her hand, careful, letting our palms touch fully for the first time. The warmth of her skin, the subtle tremor, the way she pressed lightly back, it was all electric. My heart hammered, every nerve alive. Her eyes met mine, wide, honest, vulnerable, and in that look I saw everything: caution, fear, longing, regret, desire. It was messy, human, raw, and it was ours. "I can't," she whispered again, voice cracking just enough to make me ache. "I can't lose myself in this." "You won't," I murmured, fingers brushing the hair from her face, tucking it behind her ear gently. "Not if we're honest. Not if we—" I stopped, realizing the words didn't matter. The tension, the closeness, the heat in her gaze said everything. Her lips parted slightly, and I saw the fleeting hesitation, that delicate, fragile moment where choice hovered. I held her gaze, waited for the silent answer, feeling the space between us shrink with every heartbeat. And then she leaned in. Just a little, but enough. Enough to erase doubt. Enough to surrender to the pull that had been building for weeks. Her forehead brushed mine, and I could feel the warmth of her breath, the faint scent of her perfume, the softness of her presence pressing against me. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The air between us was dense, heavy with everything we'd held back, everything we had risked, everything we were about to give into. Every heartbeat, every whispered inhale, every small tremor of fingers entwined, spoke louder than words ever could. For the first time, I understood her completely, the strength and the vulnerability, the caution and the longing. And I knew she understood me. Not the surface me, not the careful, measured facade, but the part that had been drawn to her from the start, that had hungered for connection, for recognition, for something real. We stayed like that, suspended on the edge of finally crossing the line, the world outside forgotten. I didn't care about risk, judgment, or consequence. All that mattered was the messy, unpolished, undeniably human connection that bound us together in that instant. And in that closeness, hand in hand, foreheads touching, breaths mingling, there was clarity. We had crossed the line between restraint and surrender. We understood each other fully now, in every tremor, every glance, every heartbeat. The choice had been made. And there was no turning back. The locker room felt different now. Empty, quiet, yet charged with the residue of what had passed. No words were needed. We had already said everything through lingering touches, stolen glances, and breaths that mingled just a heartbeat too long. She leaned against the bench, and I sat beside her, our shoulders brushing, hands brushing, until it felt natural to let them intertwine. Her fingers fit perfectly with mine, warm and alive, and the small contact grounded me in a way that made all the hesitation, all the fear of judgment, feel distant and irrelevant. "You're still here," she said softly, almost teasing, though her eyes shone with relief and something deeper. "I'm not going anywhere," I murmured, letting my thumb brush her knuckles, careful, deliberate. "Not if you don't want me to." She smiled, a slow, soft expression that crinkled the corners of her eyes, carrying the weight of months of caution finally melting away. She leaned in, resting her head lightly against my shoulder, and I could feel the gentle rise and fall of her breath, the warmth of her presence, the quiet intimacy that didn't need words. We sat like that for a while, letting the world shrink to just us. There was no need to rush, no need to justify or explain. The age gap, the social whispers, the careful lines we'd drawn for ourselves, none of that mattered anymore. It was just her and me, fragile and messy and perfectly human. "I wasn't sure we'd get here," she whispered, voice soft, trembling just a little. "I wasn't sure I could let myself." "You don't have to worry," I said, tilting my head slightly so I could brush my forehead gently against hers. "We'll figure it out together. No pretending, no holding back." Her fingers traced small patterns along the back of my hand, slow and intimate, and I felt a calm settle over me that I hadn't known I could feel. She tilted her head up just enough for me to place a soft kiss on her temple, lingering, gentle, full of unspoken promises. "I've wanted this for so long," I admitted, quiet enough for only her to hear. "I know," she whispered back, pressing a little closer. "I've wanted it too. More than I realized." We stayed like that, quiet, connected, our bodies close but not urgent, sensual in the way that comes from complete understanding and shared restraint. The tension had melted into something warm, safe, yet thrilling, a human intimacy that didn't need drama to feel real. Finally, she shifted slightly, resting her head on my chest, and I wrapped an arm around her. The locker room lights flickered softly above, a mundane backdrop to a moment that felt monumental. I could feel her heartbeat through the thin fabric of her shirt, steady and familiar, and I rested my cheek against her hair, inhaling her scent. Everything felt in place. The doubts, the fears, the years of hesitation, all of it had led to this one messy, beautiful, human connection. We didn't need perfection. We just needed each other. And as we sat together, fingers intertwined, foreheads touching, and breaths sinking, I knew we had finally crossed from longing into presence. From desire into understanding. From hesitation into connection. I whispered, almost to myself, "We're together now." She smiled against my chest, soft and content. "Yes. Together." The locker room was empty. The world outside could wait. And for the first time, it felt like we had everything we needed right here.